Hi everyone, welcome to our next mini lecture. This mini lecture is going to be all about Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so what is Bloom? So Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy of learning or thinking, and it's usually seen as a pyramid or steps because as you think deeper and more critically about something, you can move up Bloom's hierarchy of thinking. So this was actually developed by Benjamin Bloom. That's him there on the screen. It was developed in the 1950s, and it's really used in a way for you to guide your lesson planning. So Bloom's taxonomy is a way of thinking, okay, if you're thinking about something in this way, this is how deep you are thinking about it. And these are the types of activities that you could do to practice the skill or to display your thinking. And so we use these as we write our lesson objectives. And here's a great quote from Benjamin Bloom. He says, creativity follows mastery. So mastery of skills is the first priority for young talent. So what he's saying is that once students are able to master a skill, then they're able to think creatively and perform creatively using the skills that they've learned. So what we're teaching our students in our classroom is going to set them up for success when they leave our classroom and give them the opportunity to be creative in their thinking. So here's Bloom's right here, and it looks like stairs. So we start here at the very bottom with remember, and we move all the way up to create. So the way that we think about something or the actions that we take when we do something in a lesson really falls under these categories through Bloom's, and they get more difficult as you move up these stairs. This is a great visual to really show the different types of Bloom's taxonomy. So the first level is remember, and it really truly is just remembering something. It's simple recall of information. So if I was reading a book with some students, Jane walked up the hill, Jane got some water, Jane walked home and drank a glass of water. The way that students would remember it would be something like me saying, okay, so what did Jane do? That's something that students can simply just remember from the story that we read. They don't need to really think too hard about it because it's something that they could probably point to in the text to kind of prove their answer. Remembering is just that simple recall of information. Like if you've ever had to memorize all the elements on the periodic table of elements, you're just remembering the titles and the placement of those on the periodic table. That's not really deep thinking. The deep thinking comes from what do you know then about the periodic table of elements? But sometimes we just want students to remember something. We just maybe want them to remember who the main character of a story was. And then later, as we teach them more skills about reading, then we ask them a little bit more about the main character, like their motivations or something like that. But sometimes we just want to start with that simple, can you remember something? Then we move up to now understanding. So it's taking something that the students have maybe read or seen and then explaining it. So an example of that, if we're talking about our story, Jane walked up the hill, Jane got water. Remember, our remembering question was, what did she do? And the answer was she walked up the hill. A question where we would maybe have students understand would be to say, why do you think Jane walked up the hill? Why would she do that? So they're understanding what's happening in the story. So a student could say, well, when she got home, she drank a glass of water. So maybe she was thirsty and that's why she walked up the hill. So it's using the facts that they see to make just to understand what's happening or why something is happening. The next level is application. So it's taking something from one situation and then applying it or using it in another way. So an example of that would be if students were taking their understanding of maybe how to write a story, that you need characters and a setting and you need a problem and a solution, and then they take that understanding and then they use it to teach maybe someone else how to write a story. So they're taking what they've learned in one lesson and then they're using it in another lesson. It can be a little more difficult that way. The next level is analyze. And this is a very high level of thinking. So what it is it's breaking information into parts, organizing it, looking at the structure of something. So an example of analyze would be if you're teaching your students how to write an essay that's an opinion piece, you could present them with an essay that has already been written, maybe a newspaper article, and have them analyze it and say, okay, so where did the author state their opinion? And you could have them highlight it and you could say, where did the author use facts to support their opinion? And they can basically dissect this opinion article and use that to build their own understanding of how they can then write their own opinion article. Evaluate is a very high level of thinking as well. You can tell we're on the higher end of this pyramid here. And evaluate asks students to criticize or make decisions. So that can happen in an experiment. Or if students were doing their opinion writing unit with you, and then you had them read that example opinion article, and when they were analyzing, they were really just highlighting, where is the opinion, where's the fact that the author used. If you wanted to increase the level of thinking, then you could ask the students to evaluate it. You could say, was this an effective opinion article? And tell me why. And students could share then with you, yes, this was really effective because the author was able to state their opinion and then used facts and details to support that opinion. And then the very highest level of Bloom's is to create. So they are making something new on their own. They're inventing something. A great example of this would be if you're doing a unit on habitats, teaching all of the things that habitats need to have to support life, like food, water, air, certain types of oxygen, then you could have an assignment where the students now create their own planet or they create their own new type of habitat and then can describe the different resources that make that habitat livable for, whatever organisms they decide to have on their new planet that they're creating. Okay, so we use Bloom's to write our learning objectives. So we think first here in the middle of our circle. So this image here is my favorite thing to use when I am writing lesson plans, because what it does is it's organized first here by the level of thinking. So we start here with knowledge. This is the lowest level of thinking, and come on around here up to evaluation. Now, what's really great is if you think about the level of thinking you want your students to have, and you head into the orange space, it gives you verbs that you can use to write your objectives. So if I'm thinking, okay, I want my students to be in the knowledge area of maybe the parts of a plant, because I want them to be able to learn the plant life cycle and things like that. So we're going to start first with, I just want them to know the parts of a plant. So then I can head over here and say, okay, what could I have them do that would show their knowledge of the parts of a plant? Well, right here, I see label. So I could give them a picture of a plant and have them label the parts of the plant. So these show you all the different types of actions that students can take. And then here in these, the greenish areas, then show you the different types of things that students can do. These would be like the products that you might see from students here. So this is really great when you're writing your learning objectives. Okay, so I just want to look at some objectives, and I want us to look at the actions that students will be doing in the objective and the level of thinking, and we're going to try and guess what the level is on Bloom's taxonomy here. So our first objective is students will list the characters. Let's say the characters. The students will list the characters in a story. So take a minute, pause the video, and think, what level of Bloom's is this thinking to list a character? Oh, so the answer, oh my goodness, we're out of order. Here we go. Okay, so the answer then would be remember. So if students are listing a character, they're not really telling you much more about the character than what their names are. So it's not a deep level of thinking, it's just recall, remembering who is the character. Okay, next objective. Students will determine the main idea of a paragraph. Go ahead and pause and think, what level of Bloom's is this thinking? Okay, so it's understand. So they're going to use facts from a paragraph and use those together to determine what the main idea is. This is not remember, or the level of remember, because students aren't going to read a paragraph that says the main idea is X, Y, Z. They're going to read a whole paragraph that gives them some information, and then they're going to have to use that information that's given to them in the paragraph to then determine what the main idea is. So this level of thinking is understand. Okay, the next objective is students will illustrate the events of a story. Go ahead and pause and think, what level of Bloom's is this objective? Oh, did I lose it? Okay, so illustrate. They're illustrating the events of a story. So this would be in the understand part of Bloom. So it's not remember because the students aren't just pointing to or telling you the events of a story. They're going to illustrate them. So there is some cognitive work that needs to happen for the student to visualize the events and then illustrate them on a paper. Okay, the next objective is students will compare and contrast Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. So go ahead and pause and think, what level of Bloom's is this? Okay, so this is analyze. So students are taking one person, Abraham Lincoln, and then they are comparing them to George Washington. They are analyzing the different parts. See, you can see here, breaking down information into component parts. So they're analyzing them. They're looking at them and thinking, what is the same? What is different between these two historical figures? So if you were asking students to do this, you would be working up here in this level of thinking. So you can tell that as students move through different grade levels, they'll move up this Bloom's taxonomy. We certainly would not ask kindergartners or first graders to have an objective like this because they cannot think that deeply about these historical figures that they may never have been introduced to before. But a first grader or a kindergarten student would read a story about Abraham Lincoln and maybe recall a fact about him. They could say he is the first president. Okay. All right, and then we have students will recite a poem about frogs. This is an easy one to think about here, so go ahead and pause and think, what does it mean if students are reciting a poem? How deeply are they thinking about something? Okay, so that's remember. They're really not doing much more than remembering or memorizing a poem about frogs and then saying it back to you. Now, this could still be a good objective for a kindergartner or a first grader because they're working on maybe their oral presentation skills. Okay, we have students will create a menu for a new restaurant with healthy foods options. I'll give you a hint. The verb is also the level of thinking here with Bloom's. So that level is create. So they're using what they know about healthy food options, and now they are creating their own new menu. Okay, students will graph populations in the U.S. between 1776 and 1876. So let's think, what level of Bloom's thinking is this? This is analyze. So they're going to analyze this information that has been given to them and then create this graph. Okay, so that's all for Bloom's. Bloom's is so important, and there's so many videos out there for you. I've shared a few in our topic resources, so please make sure you're watching those videos as they will really help you to understand. When we know how deep we want students thinking about something, then we can choose verbs that align to that level of thinking to help us write our objectives. All right, thank you.